She had 40 seconds before the patient died, and the man blocking her path didn't believe she could count. "Step back, Carter." Dr. Leonard Briggs planted himself between Emily and the crash cart like he owned the room, which, in his mind, he did. "I said step back." The monitor screamed. Flatline. Emily didn't step back. What happened next would be recorded in the incident report as unauthorized intervention. What it actually was, a nurse who'd kept her mouth shut for 11 months finally deciding that someone's mother wasn't going to die on a Tuesday afternoon because a man with bad shoes and a God complex couldn't read an EKG. 3 minutes later, the patient had a pulse. Briggs had witnesses. Emily had results. And neither of them would forget what happened in that room, because one of them was about to discover that the nurse he'd been trying to run out of Silver Creek Medical Center for almost a year wasn't remotely close to what he thought she was. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the very last second of this story, because I promise you, the ending is going to hit harder than anything you've seen this week. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Silver Creek Medical Center sat at the edge of Ashford, Oregon, where the coast fog rolled in from the Pacific and never quite left before noon. It was a Level 2 trauma center that handled everything the region threw at it: logging accidents, highway crashes, fishing boat emergencies pulled off the water by Coast Guard helicopter. The staff liked to say it wasn't the biggest hospital in the state, but it might be the busiest per capita, and that pride kept most of them through long winters and longer shifts. Emily Reyes Carter had been working there since October of the previous year. She'd taken the position after a long gap in her civilian nursing career, a gap she didn't explain, and nobody pushed her on it too hard because her credentials were clean and her references were solid and the ER was short. 3 nurses heading into the rainy season. She'd shown up on her first day in plain scrubs and clean sneakers, said hello to the charge nurse, and gone to work. She was 29, 5'4", lean, with the kind of posture that comes not from self-consciousness but from muscle memory, straight spine, grounded stance, eyes that moved around a room in a particular way, cataloging exits and obstacles before she'd consciously decided to. She didn't talk much about herself. She was good at her job in a way that was hard to define at first, not flashy, not loud, just present in a room in a manner that made things go smoother than they should have. The staff liked her well enough. Most of them, anyway. Dr. Leonard Briggs did not like her at all. He was 53, chief of emergency medicine for the past 9 years, and he had a specific idea of how his ER functioned and who got to be in charge of what. He'd built his department from a chronically underfunded mess into something that had won a regional excellence citation 2 years running, and he wasn't shy about reminding people of that. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed like he expected to be photographed. Collar always crisp, stethoscope positioned just so. He spoke in the confident half-shout of someone who'd spent 20 years in rooms where he was always the most important person present. The problem with Emily, from Briggs's perspective, wasn't her work. Not exactly. It was her manner. She disagreed with him, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, in the particular way of someone who has reasons for their opinion and is waiting for you to engage with them rather than override them. Most nurses, when Briggs made a call, nodded or said, "Yes, doctor," and moved on. Emily would say something like, "I want to flag that his O2 sat has been trending down for the last 40 minutes, even on the current flow rate. Do you want me to watch it, or should I prep for something else?" And the flag was almost always right, which somehow made it worse. He'd started documenting her in November. Small things, a note that she'd administered a dose outside the usual timing window, a record of a patient interaction he characterized as abrupt, a complaint from a physician's assistant who'd felt she'd overstepped. None of it would have stood up to real scrutiny, but files had weight, and Briggs knew how to use them. Emily knew he was building a case against her. She wasn't sure exactly when she'd figured it out, maybe late November, when the charge nurse had given her a look after a shift briefing that said, "I'm sorry, I can't say anything." Maybe earlier. It didn't change how she worked. She showed up, she did her job, she flagged the things that needed flagging, and she let Briggs believe he was winning whatever war he thought they were having. The Tuesday in March that everything broke open started like most Tuesdays. Gray sky, fog still heavy at 7 a.m., the overnight shift running thin from 2 call-outs. Emily came in at 7:30 for a midday start, stopped at the board to read the current census, and found the ER running 11 patients with 3 holding from the night before. The patient in Bay 4 was the one she noticed first. Margaret Holloway, 61, brought in at 4 a.m. by her daughter for what the overnight notes called generalized weakness and shortness of breath, onset gradual, patient denies chest pain. She'd been started on supplemental oxygen and was listed as stable pending cardiology consult at 10. Her vitals from the overnight looked unremarkable if you read them fast, but Emily stood at the board for a moment longer than most people would have and noticed that they weren't actually stable. They were trending. Small, slow, consistent movement in the wrong direction. She pulled the full chart at the nursing station. Overnight nurse, doing her best with a short staff, had documented well but hadn't connected some dots. Emily connected them in about 90 seconds. Elevated JVP based on the description in the admission note. Peripheral edema, bilateral. Respiratory rate creeping up across 3 documented checks. O2 requirement that had quietly increased from 2 liters to 4 between the 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. vitals. "Who's got Bay 4? What?" she asked the day shift charge nurse, Diane Ochoa. Diane looked up from the assignment board. "Briggs is covering until the attendings finish rounds. Why?" "I think Mrs. Holloway might be in early heart failure. She needs a BNP and probably a chest x-ray before that cardiology consult, not after." Diane's expression shifted, the careful look of someone who understood the situation completely. "You want me to put in the orders?" "I want someone to look at her. Now, preferably." "I'll page Dr. Briggs." What happened next took 17 minutes, and Emily tracked all 17 of them. Briggs came down from the 3rd-floor consult he'd been on, glanced at the chart Emily had flagged, and said, "She's been stable through the night. Cardiology's coming at 10. "Her O2 requirement doubled in 2 hours," Emily said. "Overnight nurses chart conservatively. I've looked at 1,000 of these." He handed the chart back to Diane without making eye contact with Emily. "Keep the current orders." "I'd like it documented that I raised the concern," Emily said. That got his attention. He turned slowly, the way people do when they want you to feel the weight of their displeasure. "I'll pretend I didn't hear that tone, Carter." "It wasn't a tone. It was a request." He walked away. Emily went to Bay 4. Margaret Holloway was a small woman with silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been sick long enough to be embarrassed about it. Her daughter, a woman around 40 named Joanna, was sitting in the plastic chair beside the bed, coat still on, looking like she hadn't slept. "Good morning. I'm Emily. I'll be your nurse today." She took Margaret's hand to check her pulse and had an excuse to look at her nail beds, her skin color, the fine sweat at her hairline that wasn't from exertion. "How are you feeling compared to when you came in?" "Honestly," Margaret said, "worse. I didn't want to bother anyone." "That's what I'm here for." Emily kept her voice even. "Can you take a deep breath for me?" Margaret tried. The breath was short, not dramatically so, but noticeably. Her lips pursed with the effort. "Do you feel more comfortable sitting up?" "Yes. I've been trying to keep the bed up, but the overnight girl said to lie flat for the blood pressure readings." Emily adjusted the bed. "Sitting up is fine." She started her assessment without making it look like an assessment. Pulse, skin, capillary refill, the subtle shift in how Margaret's neck looked when she was propped at 45 degrees. The jugular vein was more visible than it should have been. She finished and gave Margaret a calm smile. "I'm going to get Dr. Briggs to come take another look. Hang tight." She found Briggs at the nursing station writing notes. "I need you to reassess Bay 4, she said, keeping her voice flat and professional. "Her JVP is elevated and she's more symptomatic sitting up than lying down. This isn't baseline stable. I think she's decompensating. I assessed her 12 minutes ago. She's changed in 12 minutes." He set down his pen. He looked at her with the particular expression he'd been calibrating for months, the one that said she was overstepping and he was tolerating her barely and only because of the staffing situation. "You've been a nurse for how long?" It wasn't a real question. He knew her hire date. Long enough, she said. I'll decide when Mrs. Holloway needs reassessment. What I need from you right now is to go run an IV in Bay 7 because that patient has been waiting 20 minutes and it's actually your job. There were 6 people in earshot, 2 other nurses, a tech, a medical student, an orderly. Everyone pretended to be busy. Emily held his gaze for 1 beat longer than was comfortable for him. Then she said, I'll document this conversation, and walked toward Bay 7. She ran the IV. She checked her other patients. She watched the clock. At 8:47, the Bay 4 monitor alarmed. She was moving before the sound finished. So was the tech, and Diane, and a second-year resident named Dr. Fiona Walsh, who happened to be walking past. They hit the bay doorway at almost the same moment. Margaret Holloway was sitting up, both hands pressed to her chest, breathing in shallow, rapid pulls that had nothing to do with anxiety, and everything to do with fluid backing up into places air was supposed to be. She's in respiratory distress, Walsh said, already reaching for the call button. I know. Emily was at the bedside. Mrs. Holloway, look at me. Stay with me. She was checking pulse, fast, weak, irregular, and looking at the monitor, which was showing an ugly rhythm that had no business being there. Get Briggs, get the crash cart, and I need a 12 lead now. Walsh got Briggs on the phone. Emily heard the conversation from 4 feet away, Walsh's half of it, which was enough. He said something. Walsh's face changed. She said, yes, but she's... And then she stopped talking because whatever Briggs said ended the discussion. Emily didn't wait. She started the 12 lead herself. She repositioned Margaret, who was fighting to stay conscious, and talked to her the whole time, low, steady, the voice that works when nothing else does. I've got you. I need you to stay right here with me. Can you do that? I'm scared, Margaret whispered. I know, that's okay. I'm right here. The 12 lead printed. Emily read it in the time it takes most people to find their glasses. She'd read several thousand of them in her life. Not all of them in hospital settings, not all of them in conditions anything like this. And what she was looking at was an evolving STEMI with new changes that had not been present on the admission EKG. Briggs walked in 40 seconds later. He stopped in the doorway, took in the scene, looked at Emily. What are you? She's got an acute MI, Emily said. New ST elevation, inferior leads. She needs the cath lab now, not cardiology at 10 o'clock. I'll be the one making that determination. Then make it. He crossed the room and took the strip from her hand, and she watched his face go through 3 different expressions in about 4 seconds. She recognized the last one. It was the look of a man who has just been proven wrong in front of witnesses and is trying to figure out how to reframe the next 30 seconds so it doesn't look like what it is. He called the cath lab. Margaret was moving within 4 minutes. Joanna grabbed Emily's arm at the bay door, both hands, the grip of someone who doesn't know what else to do with the fear. Is she going to be okay? She's going where she needs to be, Emily said. That's what matters right now. The debrief happened at 9:30, in the small room off the nursing station that served as an unofficial staff meeting space. Briggs ran it. 6 people in the room, Emily included, and the air had the particular quality of a conversation that has been rehearsed on one end. I want to be clear about something, Briggs said. He was standing. Everyone else was sitting. What happened this morning was a breakdown in protocol. A nurse intervened in a clinical decision above her scope without authorization. Whatever the outcome, that's not how this department operates. Nobody said anything. Emily looked at the table. Carter, I want to know what you were thinking when you ran that 12 lead without physician authorization. She looked up. I was thinking the patient was going to die. That's not a clinical justification. It's the only one that matters. The silence in the room was different now. Not the silence of people avoiding the conflict, but the silence of people deciding something. She could feel it. A nurse named Rita, who had 12 years at Silver Creek and said very little in any meeting, was staring at a point 6 inches above Briggs's head with the expression of someone doing math. You're going to be written up, Briggs said, and I'm going to be recommending to administration that we revisit your continued placement in this department. Do you understand that? Emily met his eyes. I understand that you're saying that in front of 5 witnesses, yes. His jaw tightened. We're done here. People filed out. Diane held back, waited until the room was almost empty, and then said to Emily quietly, You were right about her from the beginning. I know. That doesn't fix what he's going to do. I know that too. Diane looked at her for a moment, a real look, the kind that's trying to read something underneath the surface. Whatever she saw, she didn't comment on it. She just nodded once and walked out. The day continued. Emily worked it the way she worked all of them, which was to say, thoroughly, without shortcuts, and with the constant background awareness of the department she'd developed in the first 2 months, and had never stopped updating. She knew which monitors had bad leads and which patients liked to desaturate after meals. She knew that the supply room on the East Wing ran out of 20-gauge catheters every third Thursday, and you had to grab them Wednesday afternoon. She knew that the medical student currently rotating through, a third-year named Derek who was brilliant and overwhelmed in roughly equal measure, needed about 45 seconds of patient silence before he could articulate what he was actually observing, and if you gave him that time, he was usually right. She discharged 2 patients. She admitted one. She helped stabilize a construction worker who'd come in with a laceration that turned out to be covering a fracture that turned out to be covering a pneumothorax, which was a bad afternoon for him and a busy one for everyone nearby. At 2:15, she got a text from a number she recognized, the HR coordinator at Silver Creek, a woman named Brenda Sato, who had always been careful around Emily in the way that people are careful around someone they expect to need professionally someday. The text said, "Can you come by my office before you leave today? Administration would like to meet with you." Emily read it twice, texted back, "What time?" 4:30. Dr. Hollister will be there. Dr. Warren Hollister was the chief medical officer. He didn't usually attend routine HR meetings. She put her phone away and went to check on the patient in Bay 9. The 4:30 meeting was in Hollister's office on the 4th floor, not in HR, which changed the weight of it. Hollister was 60, a vascular surgeon by training who'd moved into administration 8 years ago, and he had the careful manner of someone who'd spent decades managing the distance between what physicians do and what they're supposed to do. He sat behind his desk. Briggs sat to his left. Brenda Sato sat to his right with a notepad. There was a chair across from all 3 of them. Emily sat in it. "Thank you for coming up," Hollister said. "We want to talk about this morning's events." "Of course." Dr. Briggs has submitted a formal complaint regarding the incidents in Bay 4. He's characterized the situation as a significant breach of clinical scope and chain of command. "I read the preliminary write-up," Emily said. "Some of it is accurate." Briggs's expression sharpened. He hadn't expected that. "Which parts?" Hollister asked. "I did administer a 12-lead EKG without waiting for explicit physician authorization. That part is accurate." She paused. "The part that isn't accurate is the characterization of the patient's condition at the time. She was actively decompensating. I had flagged concerns to Dr. Briggs twice in the previous hour. I have the documentation." "We've seen your documentation," Hollister said. "Then you've seen that I flagged elevated JVP and worsening O2 requirement at approximately 7:55 a.m. Dr. Briggs chose not to reassess at that time. When Mrs. Holloway went into distress at 8:47, I intervened because waiting for authorization would have cost her significant time." "The cath lab report," Brenda said, half to herself, looking at her notepad. "She'll recover," Hollister said. He said it to the desk, not to Emily. "The cardiologist's note suggests earlier intervention was beneficial." Briggs shifted in his chair. "The outcome doesn't retroactively justify—" "I'm not arguing about the outcome," Emily said. "I'm noting that the clinical picture I identified was accurate, that I communicated it through appropriate channels, and that when those channels failed to produce action, I made a judgment call. I'll stand behind that call." The room was quiet. Hollister looked at her. "Dr. Briggs is recommending your removal from the emergency department." "I understood that was likely. Do you have anything to say to that?" Emily thought about that for a moment. She thought about Margaret Holloway's hands, the grip of them, the way she'd been embarrassed about being sick. She thought about Joanna in the plastic chair with her coat still on. "I'd like it on record," she said, "that in my 11 months at this facility, I have never failed to document my concerns, never acted outside my training, and never done anything in that ER that I wouldn't do again in the same circumstances. If that's a problem, then I suppose it's a problem." Hollister studied her. Briggs said, This hospital can't function if nurses second-guess every physician order. I didn't second-guess an order, Emily said, turning to look at him directly. You gave no order. You walked away. Silence. We'll be in touch, Hollister said finally. Emily stood, thanked them for their time, sincerely, without irony, and walked out of Chassem. She took the stairs down. 4 flights, which she preferred to the elevator, and not just because the hospital's single elevator bank was perpetually slow. She pushed through the stairwell door on the ground floor and almost walked into Rita, the 12-year veteran who was apparently just standing there. Sorry, Emily said. I've been working up to asking you something, Rita said. She was a heavy-set woman with reading glasses on a lanyard and the general appearance of someone who has long since stopped caring what people think of her shoes. You're not afraid of him? It wasn't really a question. No, Emily said. How come? Emily considered that. The honest answer was long and complicated and not something she was going to give in a stairwell. I've worked in rooms that were scarier than that office, she said. Rita looked at her, same look Diane had given her, reading something, not quite placing it. He's going to try to push you out, you know that. He's been trying since November. He's serious now. The Holloway thing shook him up, which means he's going to move faster because scared men always do. Rita paused. I'm telling you because I think it's information you need, not because I'm going to be able to stop it. I'm just a nurse. So am I, Emily said. Something in Rita's expression softened, fractionally. Get some rest. Emily nodded and walked toward the exit. The fog was back in from the coast, thicker now, catching the hospital's exterior lights and turning everything soft and undefined. She sat in her car for a moment without starting it. Not because she was upset, just because she needed 30 seconds where no one needed anything from her. Her phone lit up with a text from a number she hadn't heard from in 8 months. Not a name, just a number she had memorized and therefore never needed to save. It said, Heard you're in Ashford. You good? She stared at it. 3 years of work. 14 months of silence. And now this. She typed back, Fine. Why? The 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again, then, because something is moving your direction and I thought you should know. Emily sat with that for a long moment. Outside, the fog pressed against the windshield. Somewhere across the parking lot, an ambulance bay door opened and closed with a mechanical thud. She started the car. Whatever was coming, it would arrive whether she sat in a parking lot worrying about it or went home and got 3 hours of sleep before the next shift. She'd learned that lesson in circumstances significantly more serious than this one. You controlled what you could control, you stayed ready, and you didn't burn energy on the shape of things before they showed up. She pulled out of the lot and drove into the fog. At 11:43 that night, her pager went off. Mass casualty alert. ER. She was already pulling on her jacket. She made it to Silver Creek in 9 minutes, which was faster than it should have been given the roads, and came through the ambulance bay to find the ER in a state of controlled chaos that was tipping, slowly but perceptibly, toward the uncontrolled kind. 3 ambulances in the bay. 2 more incoming, according to the radio she could hear from the triage desk. A tractor-trailer had jackknifed on Route 18 and caught a commuter van in the slide. 8 confirmed injured, 2 critical, and the highway was shut down in both directions. Emily clipped on her badge and went straight to Diane, who was running triage with a focused expression that meant she hadn't slept and wasn't going to. Tell me where you need me. Bay 2, 44-year-old male, head trauma, BP dropping. Walsh is in there, but she's trying to run 2 patients. Got it. Emily moved. Bay 2 was loud in the specific way of a trauma bay. Monitors, voices, equipment being opened and slammed and moved. Doctor. Fiona Walsh was at the head of the bed managing the airway, which meant she needed someone to manage everything else. Emily took it without announcement. IVs, pressure, blood draw, talking to the paramedic who was still finishing his handoff report while simultaneously getting out of the way. They worked the patient for 40 minutes. By the end, his pressure was holding and Walsh had him intubated and a bed upstairs was waiting. Good, Walsh said, not to anyone in particular. She pushed a strand of hair out of her face. Okay, good. Who else? Emily asked. They ran like that for 2 hours. One trauma after another rolling through, the staff finding their rhythm the way they always did when things got serious enough. The distractions fell away, the politics became irrelevant, and what was left was just the work and the person in front of you and the next 5 minutes. Briggs was present. He was working. She'd give him that. Whatever he was personally, professionally, he moved with speed and confidence in a genuine mass casualty event, and 2 of the critical patients from the van were alive because of his decisions. She wasn't going to pretend otherwise, and she didn't. At 1:45 a.m., the last critical patient had been stabilized and transferred upstairs. The ER was running at a controlled pitch, and the staff was collectively running on the specific kind of adrenaline that comes after you've done the thing and the shaking hasn't started yet. Emily was restocking Bay 6 when she heard the main ER doors open. Not the ambulance bay, the front doors. At 1:45 in the morning, she stepped out of Bay 6 and looked down the corridor. 3 men walked in. No one at the front desk. The receptionist had been pulled back to help with the surge and hadn't been replaced yet. The men moved through the empty waiting room with the particular kind of purposefulness that had nothing to do with being sick. No one in obvious distress. No one looking for help. They move the way people move when they know exactly where they're going and they don't care who sees them. One of them had his right hand inside his jacket. Emily stood in the corridor and watched them come, and her body did something that it hadn't done in 3 years. It went very, very still. Not frozen. Not afraid. Ready. The man in front stopped when he saw her. He had dark eyes and the kind of face that had done difficult things and didn't apologize for them. He looked at her scrubs, her badge, her expression. "Where's the security office?" he asked. "Closed at midnight," she said. "Skeleton crew. What do you need?" His eyes moved past her into the ER, scanning, looking for something or someone specific. "Is there a patient who came in from the Route 18 accident? Mid-30s, male, gunshot wound to the left shoulder?" Emily knew exactly who he was describing. She'd helped stabilize him an hour ago. The paramedic notes had listed the wound as sustained during the incident, vague language that she'd filed away automatically, the way she filed away a lot of things. "I'd need to see identification before I share any patient information," she said. The man's hand moved inside his jacket, and the 2 behind him shifted weight simultaneously. Emily didn't move. Somewhere behind her she heard footsteps, Diane coming around the corner, stopping short. The sound of the charge nurse processing what she was seeing. The man in front produced something, not a badge, a photograph. Grainy, printed on regular paper, folded at the center. He held it out. Emily looked at it without taking it. The man in the photograph was the gunshot patient upstairs, standing next to a stack of wooden crates. In an environment that was not a hospital and not a civilian setting, and was, in fact, a place Emily recognized with a clarity that hit her like cold water, because she had stood in rooms that looked exactly like that photograph in a different life, and a different name, and a different version of herself. She looked up from the photograph. The man's dark eyes were steady on her face, reading her reaction. "You recognize it," he said quietly. Not a question. And Emily understood in that moment that whatever text she'd received in the parking lot 8 hours ago, whatever was moving her direction, this was the beginning of it. The ER hummed around them. Monitors beeped. Somewhere a patient called for a nurse. She looked at the 3 men and made a decision, not in the way you decide to have coffee or take a different route home, but in the way you make the kind of decision that reorganizes everything that comes after it. "Diane," she said without turning around, "go check on Bay 3. Emily, please." A pause, then footsteps, retreating. The man in front waited. "Tell me who you're with," Emily said. He said a word, an organization, 3 letters. Emily stood very still for a moment. Then she said, "Give me 2 minutes to tell my charge nurse I'm stepping away." 2 minutes turned into 4 because Diane didn't want to let her go. "You don't have to do anything those men ask you," Diane said, low and fast, standing close enough that Emily could see the specific worry in her eyes. Not the general kind, but the kind that comes from watching someone walk towards something dangerous and not being able to name what it is. "I can call security. I can call—" "Diane." Emily put a hand briefly on her arm. "I know what I'm doing." Do you know who they are? Yes. And you're still going out there. I work with what's in front of me. She picked up her jacket from the hook inside the supply room. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, call extension 4400 and ask for the duty supervisor. Tell him Emily Reyes Carter said to run the name Aldrin Voss through the federal system. She said it the way you say a combination you've memorized and don't need to think about. Flat, fast, certain. Can you remember that? Diane looked at her like she'd grown a second head. Aldrin Voss. Good. She walked back out to the corridor. The three men were where she'd left them, which told her something. They weren't impatient, weren't agitated, weren't doing the thing that nervous people do in hospitals at 2 a.m, which is to move around and touch things and ask questions to fill the silence. They stood in the same configuration she'd left them in, and the one in front tracked her across the floor as she came toward them. 5 minutes, he said. That's all we need from you. You said 2 things, Emily said. You told me who you're with, and you showed me that photograph. I need a 3rd thing before I take you anywhere near a patient. What 3rd thing? Why me? He studied her. His name, she'd find out later, was Garrett Nolan, and he was 38 and had a degree in criminal justice from a state school and 17 years of work experience that had aged him in the specific way that kind of work does. Eyes that saw too much, posture that never fully relaxed, a careful economy of motion that looked like stillness, but wasn't. He had not expected that question, or he hadn't expected it delivered in that tone, which was the tone of someone who has cleared rooms and run triage under fire and has a very precise sense of what constitutes wasting her time. Because the patient asked for you, Nolan said. He doesn't know me. He knows who you were. That landed differently than she'd expected. She let it settle for exactly 1 second and then said, "Follow me." And then she took them through the side corridor away from the active bays, past the equipment storage and the small break room and the secondary nurses' station that went unmanned after midnight. She used her badge to open the stairwell door and held it, and the 3 men followed her up without conversation. The patient they were looking for was in a transitional room on the 2nd floor, not the ICU, not a regular ward bed, but one of the 4 intermediate rooms that Silver Creek used for patients who were stable enough to be out of the ER, but too uncertain to be on a floor with a 4-to-1 nurse ratio. His name in the chart was Daniel Reese, 34, listed as a contractor injured in the highway incident. Emily had helped stabilize the shoulder wound 2 hours ago and hadn't thought much about him beyond what his chart required. She stood outside the door. "Ground rules," she said. Nolan waited. "He's post-op. He had a vessel repair. He cannot have his blood pressure spiking, which means nothing in this room is going to be abrupt or aggressive. Whatever you need from him, you're going to get it at his pace, not yours. If I say stop, you stop. Understood?" "Understood." "Your people stay outside." A flicker of something crossed his face. Not quite resistance, more like recalculation. "One of them needs to be in the room. Then he stands by the wall and doesn't open his mouth." She looked past Nolan at the 2 behind him. One of them, younger, with a stillness she recognized as deliberate training, gave a slight nod. She pointed at him. "Him." She pushed the door open. Daniel Reese was awake. She hadn't expected that. It was 2 a.m. and he'd been through surgery, and most people in his condition would be half drowned in painkillers and unconsciousness. But he was propped up, pale, with the shoulder immobilizer keeping his left arm locked, and a look on his face that was working very hard to stay neutral. His eyes went to Emily first, then to Nolan, then back to Emily. "You're her," he said. "I'm the nurse who repacked your wound 2 hours ago." "Before that." She didn't answer. "3rd Battalion, Fort Caraway, 2019. He said it quietly, like he was reading coordinates. "You won't remember me. I was a private 1st class. You pulled 3 guys out of a vehicle that was about to—" "I remember," she said. She didn't say it warmly. She said it the way you close a drawer. "What do you need to tell these men?" He looked at Nolan. Something passed between them that Emily didn't have the context for. Then Reese said, "The crates in that photograph, they're not in the warehouse anymore. They moved them 2 days ago." "Where?" Reese shifted. The movement cost him. She could see it in the tightening around his jaw. "That's the problem. I don't know exactly. I know it's north of the city. I know there's a legitimate business front. And I know the transfer was scheduled to coincide with the accident on Route 18. Nolan's posture changed, minutely. The accident was deliberate? The van that got hit, one of the passengers was a courier. Someone paid to have him on that road at that time. Reese stopped, breathed. Emily watched his monitor. I was supposed to intercept him before it happened. I didn't make it. The room was quiet except for the soft percussion of the monitoring equipment. The courier, Nolan said. He survived. I don't know. I got shot before I could confirm. Emily knew the answer to that question. She'd been in the ER when the van victims came in. 3 people. 2 had been discharged after treatment. 1 was still in the ICU on the 3rd floor with a traumatic brain injury and a prognosis that the attending had described, with the particular restraint of someone who's learned to manage hope carefully, as guarded. She didn't say that yet. What was the courier carrying? She asked. Both men looked at her. If it affected the transfer of whatever's in those crates, I need to know if it affects patient safety in this facility, she said, which was true, but was also the kind of statement that could mean many things. Nolan and Reese exchanged another look. Reese nodded slightly. Documentation, Nolan said. Chain of custody records for a weapons-related import, the kind that becomes very inconvenient for certain people if it reaches federal hands. Emily absorbed this. And the men who moved the crates, they know the courier ended up here. We have to assume yes. And they know their courier is... She stopped, recalculated. They know the courier is in this building. Nolan said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She looked at him steadily. You need to tell me right now if this hospital is a target. We don't have confirmed intelligence. That's not what I asked. A beat. We have reason to believe the people who ordered that accident may attempt to reach the courier before he can be transferred to federal custody. Emily turned and looked at the door. At the corridor beyond the small window in it, where the 2nd floor of Silver Creek Medical Center ran quiet and fluorescent lit and almost entirely unguarded. She thought about 38 patients currently in this building. She thought about the skeleton security crew. She thought about the fact that the front desk had been empty when 3 men walked in off the street 40 minutes ago, and no one had stopped them. You need to call local law enforcement, she said. We've been trying to coordinate. I don't care what you've been trying to do. You need people in this building in the next... She checked her watch. 30 minutes, or you need to move your patient to a secure location, which will require transport that will almost certainly make him worse and may kill him. She said it plainly, without drama. Those are your options. Pick one. Nolan looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not irritation. Something closer to the look of someone who has spent a long time doing a job that requires overriding other people's judgment and has just encountered a person who is going to make that very difficult. Carter, he said. Reyes Carter, she corrected automatically. You have any tactical medical experience in an active security situation? Why? Because I have 2 agents in a building I'm now concerned about securing, and I have a patient I can't move, and I have a partner agency that is currently 45 minutes out. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are, but if something happens in this building tonight, I'd rather you were informed than not. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Reese. He was watching her with the expression of someone who knows something she doesn't, and is deciding whether it's his place to say it. The painkiller haze was edging into his eyes, but underneath it was something alert and specific. Get your partner agency moving, she said to Nolan. I'll make sure the overnight staff knows to lock down access points. We have a protocol for facility lockdown. It's for weather and code situations, but the mechanics are the same. She was already thinking through it. Stairwell access, elevator override. The ambulance bay was the hardest to control because the doors operated on a sensor loop. And I need you to be straight with me about something. What? The men who shot him. Do we have a physical description? Nolan reached into his jacket, other side this time, interior pocket, and pulled out his phone, turned it to face her. 2 photographs. She studied them for 5 seconds and handed the phone back. Okay, she said. Okay, what? I've seen them before. She said it without inflection. They came to the ER at 1:45 a.m. They asked me about a gunshot patient from the Route 18 accident. The quality of stillness in the room changed completely. What did you tell them? Nolan's voice was very controlled. Nothing. They left when I said I'd need identification. She looked at him. They know he's here. And they know he's here in a way that tells me they're already inside the perimeter. They walked into this building, asked one question, and walked out. And that's the kind of reconnaissance you do when you're planning a second visit. Nolan was already on his phone before she finished the sentence. She turned back to Reese. He was the color of old paper now, the specific pallor of someone running on willpower and running low on it. Try to rest. I know you won't, but try. She adjusted his monitor leads, which had shifted during the conversation. If anyone comes through that door who isn't me or someone I send, you press that call button and you do not stop pressing it. Understood? Yes, Sergeant, he said. She stopped. She hadn't been called that in 3 years. She looked at him. He had the ghost of something on his face, not a smile, not quite, but the remnant of one. Rest, she said again, and walked out. The next 40 minutes were the kind that stretched and compressed simultaneously. Long in the way that high-stakes time always felt long, and fast in the way that running a protocol in a building you knew intimately was fast, because you weren't thinking, you were executing. She found the overnight security supervisor, a 56-year-old named Walt Greer, who had 20 years of experience and zero illusions about his department's capacity on a skeleton crew. She told him what she knew without telling him more than he needed. He ran the access lockdown on the ambulance bay doors, elevator restriction to badge only between floors 2 through 4, and a status check on every exterior entry point. 2 of the stairwell doors on the north side had faulty locks. She'd known this since February and had written it up 3 times, and Walt confirmed they were still unaddressed. Get someone physically at those doors, she said. I've got one guy for the whole north wing. Then get him to the one that matters most and tell me which one you're leaving. He told her. She went there herself. She stood in the stairwell by the north side second floor landing with the door propped at her back and her phone in her hand, and the specific quality of waiting she'd spent years training herself into. Not anticipation, not anxiety, but the clear-eyed alertness of someone who has done this before in circumstances where making a mistake had immediate and irreversible consequences. The fluorescent light in the stairwell had a flicker in it. The building made the small noises buildings make at 2:30 in the morning. The ventilation system cycling, a distant elevator motor, a far-off alarm beeping once and stopping. She was reviewing the floor layout in her head when her phone buzzed. Nolan. Need you back on 2. Now. She went. He was in the corridor outside Reese's room, and the look on his face was the first time she'd seen him look like something had surprised him. One of my agents spotted a man in the parking structure at 2300. Didn't flag it as significant at the time. Security camera just picked him up again. Ground floor interior near the East Service corridor. He turned the phone so she could see the grainy screenshot. Same man from the photograph. He's inside. Emily looked at the screenshot, looked at the corridor, ran the building in her head. East Service corridor connected to the freight elevator, which bypassed the badge restriction she'd put in place because the freight elevator ran on a separate access system that Walt's team hadn't thought to restrict. Freight elevator, she said. What? He can reach every floor on the freight elevator without a badge. Where does it open on this floor? She was already moving. Nolan was a step behind her, and she registered that he was keeping up, which meant he was faster than he looked. The freight elevator on the second floor opened in the East Utility Corridor, a narrow, poorly lit stretch used for linen transport and equipment movement. Emily came around the corner and slowed automatically, going quiet in her footsteps the way she hadn't done in 3 years, but the body remembered regardless. The elevator light was on. The doors were closed. The indicator showed it had stopped on this floor 40 seconds ago. She put her back against the wall and held up one hand. Nolan stopped. The corridor was silent. Then, from the far end of it, 30 feet ahead, a door handle moved. It was the utility room. She knew this room. Cleaning supplies, linen cart, mop sinks. She also knew that if you went through it and turned left, there was a secondary door that opened directly into the patient corridor near room 214. Near Reese's room. She thought very fast. She thought about what she had, which was a corridor, a wall, a fire extinguisher mounted 6 feet ahead on her left, and 17 years of experience, not nursing experience, the other kind, still living in her muscles regardless of what she'd spent the last 3 years trying to become. She thought about Reese in that room, about 37 other patients in this building, about Margaret Holloway, who was somewhere upstairs with a repaired heart and a daughter in a plastic chair. She didn't think about Dr. Briggs. She didn't think about the 4:30 meeting. She didn't think about what Hollister had said or what was in her personnel file or the formal write-up that was waiting for her. She looked at Nolan. He looked at her. "I need you to call this in right now," she said. Her voice was very low. "Your partner agency, local law, whoever you have, get them to this address and tell them 2nd floor East Corridor. Do it now and don't stop talking on that phone until someone tells you they're 3 minutes out." "And you?" She was already moving toward the fire extinguisher. The utility room door swung open. The man who stepped into the corridor was the same man from the photograph, and he was 30 feet away and moving fast. And he had something in his right hand that was not a hospital ID, and was not a visitor badge, and was not anything that belonged in a medical facility at 2:37 in the morning. He saw Emily at the same moment she saw him. For 1 second, neither of them moved. Then she threw the fire extinguisher. Not at him. She was accurate, but not that accurate at 30 feet. She threw it into the corridor ahead of her with enough force that it clattered and skittered and did exactly what she needed it to do, which was make him look at it for the half second she needed to cover ground. She covered it. What happened in the next 45 seconds would later be described by Nolan in his incident report as rapid and decisive physical intervention. It was accurate in the way that technical language is always accurate and completely fails to describe the actual thing. The actual thing was 2 people in a narrow corridor, and one of them had 17 years of training in how to end a physical confrontation quickly, and the other one didn't. He went down hard. She had his wrist at an angle that removed the choice about whether to hold on to what was in his hand, and then she had his arms behind him, and then she had him on the floor with the kind of controlled pressure that said stay there in a language that required no translation. She was breathing slightly harder than normal. The corridor smelled like industrial cleaner and floor wax. Nolan was on the phone. 2nd floor, East Corridor, 1 suspect down, requesting immediate, yes. Emily kept the man on the floor and looked up. At the end of the corridor, where it opened into the main patient hall, 3 night shift nurses had appeared. They were standing in a row, staring at her. Frozen. She recognized all 3 of them. She'd worked alongside all 3 of them. "Call security," she said. "Walt Greer. Tell him we need restraints on the 2nd floor east and tell him to check the freight elevator for anyone else." None of them moved. "Now," she said. They scattered. Nolan crouched beside her. "Backup is 4 minutes out." He looked at the man on the floor, then at Emily. "You want to explain to me how a civilian nurse just did that?" 4 minutes, she said. "Is there anyone else in this building that you know of?" His jaw tightened. "We're not certain." "Then we need to move. Help me get him secured and then walk me through what your surveillance has." She stood. Her hands were steady. They'd been steady the whole time, which was either a gift or the result of the kind of repetition that leaves marks you can't always see. Probably some of both. The man on the floor groaned. "Don't," she said without looking down. He went still. Nolan was looking at her with an expression that had moved well past surprise into something more complicated, something that would take longer to process than 4 minutes before backup arrived. "Reyes Carter," he said. "What?" "Who are you?" She picked up her phone from where it had fallen during the struggle. The screen was cracked at the corner. She checked the time, 2:41, and thought about the shift that was still technically running, and the patients on her assignment, and the fact that Diane was somewhere in this building without knowing any of what had just happened. "I'm the night shift nurse," she said. She said it without irony. She meant it in the way you mean things you've chosen over everything else. But Garrett Nolan was already on his phone again, and the call he was making was not to his partner agency. He was calling someone with a longer title and a different kind of authority, and Emily caught 3 words before she walked away to check on her patients. 3 words, and they were her name, her full name, the one that wasn't on her nursing badge. And then from behind her, Nolan said quietly, "We're going to need to talk about your file." She kept walking, but her hands, which had been steady through everything else tonight, went very still at her sides. Her file. She walked the corridor and let that sit in her chest for exactly the length of time it took to reach the nurse's station, which was 15 seconds, and then she put it somewhere she could deal with later and focused on what was in front of her. Diane was at the station. She'd clearly heard something. Her face had the particular arrangement of a person who has been trying not to ask questions and is failing at it. A hospital security officer Emily didn't recognize was standing near the elevator, talking into a radio with the low, urgent cadence of someone relaying information they don't fully understand yet. "All your patients accounted for?" Emily asked Diane. "Yes. What happened?" "Incident in the East Corridor. It's contained." She pulled up the patient board and ran her eyes down it. Vitals flagging in Bay 3. She'd check that next. "I need you to keep everyone away from the East Utility Corridor until Walt clears it. And I need someone physically sitting with Reese in 214. "Emily," Diane's voice was different now, lower, stripped of the professional layer. "Are you hurt?" Emily looked at her hands, a scrape on the right palm where she'd hit the floor. She hadn't noticed it. "No." "You have blood on your sleeve." She looked. Small amount, not hers, transfer from the struggle. "It's not mine. I'm fine." She moved toward Bay 3. "Call me if anything changes on the board." She spent the next 6 minutes in Bay 3 with a 67-year-old man named Victor Pratt, who'd been admitted for a hypertensive crisis and whose blood pressure had crept up again with all the ambient chaos, which was exactly what she'd been afraid of. She talked him through a breathing exercise while she rechecked his medication timing and adjusted his position, and pretended, for the duration of those 6 minutes, that the rest of the night was not happening. He needed her to be his nurse, and nothing else, so that was what she was. His pressure came down 6 points by the time she stepped out. In the hallway, 2 Ashford PD officers were moving toward the East Corridor with Walt Greer between them. Behind them, a man in a dark jacket who had Federal written in every line of him was talking on a phone and looking at the floor plan mounted on the wall by the elevator. He glanced up when Emily came out of Bay 3, and something in his look told her he already knew who she was. Nolan appeared from the East Corridor. He'd lost some of the careful composure from earlier, not much, but enough. He walked to Emily with the directness of someone who's revised his assessment and isn't wasting time about it. "Second suspect," he said. "We found him in the parking structure. He tried to run and made it approximately 40 feet. He said it without inflection, but she heard the subtext clearly enough. The third is unaccounted for. 3 men came into the ER at 1:45, she said. I only saw them leave 2. Nolan absorbed this. You're sure? I count heads. It's a habit. He looked at the man in the dark jacket who had ended his call and was walking over. They had the shorthand of people who work together in high-stress settings. A glance, a slight nod, an exchange of information in less time than a sentence would take. Ms. Reyes Carter, the second man said. He didn't extend a hand. I'm Agent Supervisor Marcus Dade. I need about 3 minutes of your time. I have patience. I know. 3 minutes. She looked at Nolan. He had the decency not to pretend this was optional. She followed Dade to the family consultation room off the main corridor, the room with the soft lighting and the box of tissues on the table and the particular heaviness of a space where bad news gets delivered. And he closed the door and turned to face her without sitting down. Daniel Reese told you about the courier, he said. Yes. The courier is currently in your ICU. Traumatic brain injury. I know. He's carrying something we need. Not on his person, it was transferred before the accident, but the location is encoded in a communication we believe is on a device in his personal effects, which were logged with your hospital's property system at admission. He looked at her steadily. We have a warrant incoming, but it's 90 minutes out. We have reason to believe the third suspect knows about the device and knows it's in this building. Emily thought about the ICU, 3rd floor, 4 nurses on overnight, 2 security cameras, one of which she happened to know had a blind spot near the north entrance because she'd walked past it 100 times and the angle was wrong. Your third suspect is going to the ICU, she said. That's our assessment, yes. How long ago did the parking structure incident happen? Dade checked his watch. 11 minutes. Then he's already had time to move. She pushed the door open. Come on. She didn't wait to see if he followed. The stairs were faster than the elevator, and she was through the stairwell door before Dade had cleared the consultation room. Third floor. She took the steps at a pace that wasn't quite running, but covered them in the time running would have. The door at the top opened into the corridor near the ICU's secondary entrance, the one most of the night staff used because it was closer to the medication room. The secondary entrance was propped open with a door wedge. She stopped. She looked at the wedge. It was a standard rubber wedge, the beige kind used throughout the hospital. Someone had placed it recently. The corridor had been clear when she'd passed through 2 hours ago on her way up to Reese's room, and overnight ICU staff didn't prop that door because it interfered with the unit's infection control pressure differential. She went through it. The ICU at Silver Creek had 6 beds and a central monitoring station, and the kind of continuous soft sound that intensive care always had. Ventilators cycling, pumps clicking, monitors maintaining their patient vigil in overlapping rhythms. The courier, listed in the chart as Marcus Tate, 41, status critical, was in bed 4, which was toward the back of the unit and partially visible from the station but not directly, because a supply cart had been moved and was blocking the sight line. The supply cart had not been in that position 2 hours ago. Emily moved to the station. The night ICU nurse, a young woman named Priya, who had 6 months on the unit and was good under pressure, looked up from her charting with an expression that shifted when she saw Emily's face. Priya, bed 4. Has anyone gone in there in the last 15 minutes who wasn't assigned staff? Priya's eyes went to the bed, to the supply cart blocking the view. She said, "A man came in. He said he was from respiratory therapy for a ventilator check. I thought Dr. Osei cleared a vent check for tonight, so I assumed." Emily was already moving. She went around the supply cart in 3 strides and pushed through the curtain for bed 4, and found a man standing at the bedside with one hand on the bedside table drawer and the other on his phone, and the drawer was open, and the patient's personal effects bag was on top of the table with the seal broken. The man looked up. He was the third one, the one she hadn't seen leave. He was bigger than she'd expected, broader in the shoulders, with the kind of weight that wasn't soft, and he had the particular calculation in his eyes of someone deciding very quickly between multiple bad options. He grabbed the effects bag. She grabbed his wrist. What followed was not clean. She'd been honest with herself about that much, even in the moment. The clean version existed only in debrief reports and training scenarios. What actually happened was a fight in a 6x8 space with a ventilated patient in the bed beside them, and a bedside monitor that got knocked with someone's elbow and started alarming, and the man was strong and had the particular desperation of someone with no good exit remaining. She took a hit to her left shoulder that she'd feel for a week. She didn't let go. She got him to the wall. She heard the door bang open, Dade coming through, then Nolan, then the sound of 2 more sets of footsteps. The man stopped fighting with the calibrated decision-making of someone who can do the math and doesn't like the answer. The effects bag was on the floor. The phone she'd seen in his hand was 3 feet from it, screen cracked, still lit. Priya was at the curtain. Her face had gone white. Behind her, 2 more ICU nurses had appeared, and beyond them, the unit was suddenly full of the sounds of law enforcement moving through a space not designed for it. The efficient clumsiness of people in body armor among IV poles and monitor cables. Emily straightened. Her shoulder was burning. She rolled it once, testing the range, and the range was adequate, if not comfortable. She picked up the effects bag by the corner, not by the handle, not touching the opening, and held it out to Dade. "I didn't open it," she said. He did. Dade took it with gloved hands he'd produced from somewhere. He was looking at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize as his version of someone who has been surprised and doesn't like the sensation. "You need medical attention," he said. "Shoulder. It'll hold." She looked at Priya. "Get me a BP cuff and check Mr. Tate right now. All the movement in here, I want to know his pressure didn't spike." Priya moved. Good. That was the right response. The man who'd been in the room was now in flex cuffs with a federal agent on each arm, and he was being walked out with the particular careful compliance of someone who has decided to minimize further damage to himself. He didn't look at Emily as he went past. She checked on Marcus Tate herself while Priya got the equipment. He was unconscious, had been unconscious since admission, and the ventilator was cycling without interruption. His pressure, when Priya got it, was elevated but not critically. Emily documented it, noted the circumstances, and flagged it in the chart for the attending in the morning. This was the work. It ran under everything else. The federal agents and the cracked phone screen and the shoulder that was going to bruise purple by morning and her own name spoken in a corridor in 3 words by a man on a phone. The work ran under all of it, continuous, indifferent to drama. She pulled the curtain back into place. Nolan was waiting outside the unit. He'd sent everyone else ahead, which meant he'd stayed deliberately, which meant there was something he'd decided to say. "Your file," he said. "I heard you the first time. The people I called tonight, they're coming here. Not for Reese, not for Tate." He paused, choosing the next words with the care of someone placing weight on uncertain ground. "They've been trying to locate your current placement for about 6 weeks. Something in her went very quiet. "Why?" she said. "Because there's an open investigation into a series of procurement decisions made by a defense contractor with connections to the unit you served in, and the evidence trail has a gap in it that several people believe you can fill." He looked at her directly. "Not as a suspect, as a witness, potentially a material one." Emily looked at the floor. She thought about 6 weeks during which she'd been writing up faulty door locks and flagging elevated JVP and learning which monitors had bad leads in Bay 4 and arguing with Leonard Briggs about whether a 61-year-old woman was stable enough to wait for a 10 o'clock consult. 6 weeks. "When do they arrive?" she asked. "Wheels down at Ashford Regional at 05:30. She looked at her watch. 2 hours and 40 minutes. "Then I have patience until then," she said. She walked back toward the stairwell. Nolan didn't follow this time, and she was glad for the length of corridor between them, where she could be just a woman walking, not a witness, not a resource, not a former sergeant with a file that apparently still had her name in it even after 3 years. She went back to her floor. She checked her patients. She documented the Bay 3 Vitals update and followed up on the board. She sat for 4 minutes in the break room with a cup of coffee she didn't taste and stared at the wall and thought about what it meant that someone had been looking for her for 6 weeks, and the people who found her first were the ones trying to get her fired. The irony of that was not lost on her. At 4:48 a.m., with 40 minutes to go before the floor transferred to day shift, the phone at the nurse's station rang. Diane picked it up. Emily watched her face change. Diane held the phone out to her. "Administration," Diane said. "Dr. Hollister?" At 4:48 in the morning, Emily took the phone. "Miss Carter?" Hollister's voice had the slightly off quality of someone who'd been woken up and had received information that had not let him go back to sleep. "I've been briefed on tonight's events by a federal supervisor. I want to be clear that the hospital's priority right now is the safety of our patients and staff." A pause. "I've also been informed that there are individuals arriving this morning with documentation related to your background and service record." "I'm aware." A longer pause. "Dr. Briggs's disciplinary recommendation for you was submitted to my office yesterday afternoon. I have not acted on it." Another pause. "I want to understand the full picture before I make any decisions." Emily said nothing. "I think," Hollister said carefully, "that we may have significantly misunderstood who we're dealing with." She kept her voice even. "Is there something you need from me right now, Dr. Hollister?" No. I just wanted you to know that the situation is being reassessed." "Thank you for calling," she said, and handed the phone back to Diane. Diane was watching her with the expression she'd been wearing since the stairwell conversation 12 hours ago, the one that was still trying to put together something it didn't have all the pieces for. "Rita was right," Diane said quietly. "You're not afraid of him." Emily looked at the board. 1 flag, Bay 8, a new admission she hadn't seen yet. "I'm going to check on Bay 8, she said. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard the main ER entrance open, not the ambulance bay, the front doors, and the sound of multiple sets of footsteps, purposeful and coordinated, moving across the waiting room floor. She stopped. She turned. 4 people. 3 men and a woman. The woman was in front, which was unusual in the particular way of someone who'd fought to be in front, and had won. She was around 50, with close-cropped silver hair and a bearing that the military called command presence, and civilians couldn't quite name but always felt. She was wearing civilian clothes, dark jacket, plain shirt, and carrying a leather folio case, and she moved through the Silver Creek ER entrance at 5 a.m. like she'd walked into much harder rooms than this one. Her eyes found Emily across 30 feet of corridor and waiting room immediately. Not searching, finding. She'd known exactly where to look. She walked toward Emily, and Emily felt the cold clarity of someone about to have a conversation they cannot prepare for because they don't know all of what's in that folio case. But they know enough to understand it's going to change everything in this building. Every decision, every hierarchy, every assumption that Leonard Briggs and Warren Hollister had made about who Emily Reyes Carter was and why she didn't matter. The woman stopped 4 feet away. "Sergeant Reyes Carter," she said. Not a question, not even a greeting exactly. More like a confirmation, the verbal equivalent of checking coordinates. Emily's mouth went dry, because she knew this woman. She had not seen her in 3 years, and had not expected to see her again. And the fact that she was here at 5 in the morning in a regional hospital in Ashford, Oregon, meant that whatever was in that folio case was not just about a procurement investigation and a material witness. It was something larger. It was the kind of something that, once it opened, didn't close. "Colonel Vasquez," Emily said. The woman looked at her for a moment, then at the corridor, at the nurse's station, at the ER in its quiet pre-dawn state. "We need a room," she said, "and we need to talk about why 6 people tried very hard to make sure you'd never be found." The room they used was the same family consultation room where Dade had spoken to her 2 hours earlier. Soft lighting, tissue box, the ghost of every hard conversation that had ever happened inside it. Emily sat. Colonel Vasquez sat across from her. Dade and Nolan took positions near the door without being asked, the unconscious geometry of people who understood their role in a room. The folio case went on the table between them. Vasquez didn't open it immediately. She looked at Emily the way commanding officers look at people they've worked with in conditions that strip away everything non-essential. No pretense in it, no performance, just the direct evaluation of someone taking stock. "You look tired," she said. "I've been working since midnight." "Before that?" Emily held her gaze. "I've been working since October." Vasquez's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. "I know. I've been reading your reports, not your nursing reports, your documentation from the past 11 months, incident logs, complaint filings, the write-up from yesterday's meeting with Hollister." She paused. "You've been meticulous." "I document everything. I always have." "I know that too." Vasquez opened the folio. Not dramatically, just opened it the way you open something you've been carrying for 6 weeks and finally have the right surface to put it on. She turned it to face Emily. The top page was a personnel file. Emily's. The real one, not the civilian nursing record. The full one, with the header and the classification marking and the service dates and the decorations list that ran to 3 lines. Below it was a second document, an investigation summary. Emily read the title and felt the cold clarity come back, the same clarity she'd felt at the ICU curtain, at the corridor, at every moment in the last 6 hours where the situation had been dangerous, and the only useful response was to see it precisely. The investigation was titled Operation Crossfield. It concerned a defense contractor named Harlan Vex Strategic Solutions, and its central allegation was that, between 2019 and 2022, someone inside Harlan Vex had been falsifying field medical equipment certifications, approving gear for combat deployment that had failed quality standards, in exchange for payments routed through 3 shell companies to accounts that had taken investigators 2 years to trace. Soldiers had used that equipment in the field. Some of them had died. Emily sat with that for a moment. Not a long moment. She'd known, in the way you know things that happened in rooms you were in, that something had been wrong with certain supply chains during her last deployment. She'd flagged it twice through official channels. Both flags had been documented and apparently buried. "The 2 flags I submitted in 2021, she said. "Found them," Vasquez said. "Both of them. Suppressed at the contracting officer level by a man named Paul Greeter, who worked for Harlan Vex and held a liaison position with the procurement office." She turned another page. "Greeter has been cooperating with investigators for 4 months. He gave us names. He also told us that after you filed the second flag, someone made a decision that you needed to be managed. Managed. Transferred. Discharged. Removed from a position where you might file a third." Vasquez looked at her directly. Your honorable discharge in early 2023 was not coincidental. It was facilitated. The room was very quiet. Emily had suspected this. Not clearly, not with evidence, but in the way you suspect things when the timeline doesn't quite add up, and the people around you start acting like they have information you're not being given. She'd set it aside, deliberately, methodically, because there had been nothing to do with the suspicion except carry it, and she'd had enough to carry. The courier, she said, Tate, was transporting a secondary copy of Greeter's documentation. Hard copies specifically because the digital records were compromised in a server incident 8 months ago that everyone in this investigation is fairly certain was not an accident. Vasquez closed the folio and left her hands flat on top of it. The people who caused the accident on Route 18 were hired by a man named Foster Drum, who is the current operations director at Harlan Vex, and whose name appears in Greeter's documentation 47 times. Where's Drum now? In custody as of 3 hours ago, arrested at his residence in Portland. Vasquez paused. The 3 men who came to this hospital tonight were not Drum's direct employees. They were contracted through a security intermediary. The contractor's name, she glanced at Dade. Aldrin Voss, Dade said from the door. Emily looked at him. I gave Diane that name. I know, it's why we ran the address flags on this facility as a precaution. It's also why I was on a phone at 2 a.m., getting authorization for a warrant instead of waiting for morning. He said it without particular emotion, but she heard the acknowledgement in it. The name she'd given Diane had accelerated something. She turned back to Vasquez. What do you need from me? A formal statement, what you observed about the equipment in the field, what you put in the 2 flags, what you remember about the timeline of your discharge. Vasquez looked at her steadily. And whatever you can tell us about a specific field incident in March 2022 involving a medical evacuation near a firebase Keller. The incident report was filed, but the supporting documentation is missing. Emily remembered firebase Keller. She remembered it in the way she remembered the things she'd worked very hard not to think about. Not suppressed, just stored somewhere she didn't open casually because the contents were not the kind you handled without preparation. 3 soldiers. A defibrillator that failed on second use because the charge retention was below spec. What she'd had to do instead with her hands, in the dark, for 11 minutes. One of the 3 had lived. I remember it, she said. Her voice was level. I'll give you the statement. Vasquez nodded once. It'll be recorded and submitted to the federal prosecutor's office by end of business today. She looked at the folio, then at Emily. There's one more thing. Your nursing board certification was reviewed as part of the investigation background. We found an irregularity. Emily went still. Not a problem with your credentials, what? Vasquez said quickly enough that Emily understood she'd seen the stillness and knew what it meant. The irregularity is that someone filed a confidential complaint against your certification 6 weeks ago. Anonymous. Alleging falsified military records. The air in the room changed. Who? Emily said. We don't know yet. The filing was routed through a third-party legal service, and the entity that filed it used a privacy shield that's technically legal and practically opaque. Vasquez watched her. But the timing correlates with when Drum's people first identified your location. Emily thought about that. About someone sitting somewhere 6 weeks ago, deciding that the cleanest way to neutralize her was not violence, which was visible, which left evidence, but paperwork. A complaint to the nursing board, a question mark over her credentials, a professional threat that would pull her attention inward, that would keep her fighting on a different front, that would make her easier to remove from the path of the investigation without anyone having to get their hands dirty. She thought about Leonard Briggs. She thought about November, when the documentation against her had started, about the write-ups, the formal complaints, the 4:30 meeting with Hollister. She thought about a very specific question. The anonymous complaint to the nursing board, she said. What level of access would someone need to file it through that kind of privacy shield? Dade and Vasquez exchanged a look. Institutional access would help, Dade said carefully. The service isn't public-facing. It's used primarily by hospital administration, insurance bodies, regulatory boards. You need a professional credential to create an account. The consultation room was very quiet. "I'd like to know," Emily said, "whether anyone has looked at the IP address associated with that filing." Okay. The day shift arrived at 7 a.m. into an ER that felt like a different building than the one they'd left the night before. Same linoleum, same fluorescent light, same board with its color-coded patient flags, but with federal agents in the corridor and police tape on the east utility entrance, and a charge nurse who had not slept, and whose expression communicated this to everyone within 20 feet without a single word. Emily stayed. She should have gone home. Her shift had technically ended at 7, and her shoulder was a deep, consistent ache that was going to be worse by tomorrow, and she had given a 2-hour recorded statement in the consultation room and then helped Nolan's team navigate the hospital's property management system to properly document the recovered effects bag, and she was running on the wrong side of 24 hours awake. She stayed because leaving felt wrong in a way she couldn't fully articulate. She was at the nurse's station writing her final shift notes when Hollister arrived. He came in at 7:20, which was early for him. She'd observed that he usually appeared around 8:30, after the department heads had completed morning rounds. He was in a suit, which meant he'd dressed deliberately, which meant someone had called him before he left home, and the call had changed what he planned to wear. He stopped when he saw her. She kept writing. He came to the station and stood on the other side of the counter, which was 3 feet away and also, in the geography of hospital hierarchy, a significant distance. "Ms. Carter, I wasn't expecting you to still be here. I had documentation to finish." "Of course." He looked at the corridor where 2 federal agents were talking near the elevator. His jaw was doing the thing that jaws do when a person has information they haven't yet figured out how to organize. "I've been on the phone since 4 a.m. That makes 2 of us." He looked at her directly. "The individuals who arrived this morning, Colonel Vasquez, Agent Dade." He paused. "They've been very forthcoming about the nature of last night's events, and about certain background details that were apparently not part of your employment file." Emily put down her pen. "Dr. Hollister, whatever questions you have about my background, you can direct them to Colonel Vasquez. She has a complete record and authorization to share relevant details with hospital leadership." She picked the pen back up. "What I can tell you is that every clinical decision I made in this facility over the past 11 months was made based on my training, my experience, and my best judgment about patient safety. That part has nothing to do with my military record." "No," he said. "No, I understand that." He was quiet for a moment. "The Holloway patient is being discharged today. Her daughter called this morning to ask about you specifically." Emily didn't say anything. "I just thought you'd want to know." He straightened his jacket, a small, unnecessary motion, the kind people make when they're not sure what to do with their hands. "I'll need to speak with Dr. Briggs this morning." "That's between you and Dr. Briggs." He nodded. He walked toward his office, and she watched him go with the specific attention of someone who has learned not to assume what a conversation means until the consequences of it become visible. The consequences became visible at 9:47. She was in the break room, genuinely trying to leave, jacket on, bag in hand, arguing with herself about whether one more cup of coffee was a good idea or a medical risk at this point, when she heard it. Not voices, exactly. More the quality of a silence that has replaced voices. The sudden absence of the low ambient noise of a functioning ER when something stops it. She came out of the break room. Leonard Briggs was in the corridor outside his office, which was the glass-walled office adjacent to the main nursing station. He was standing in a way that communicated something was wrong in his body before his face confirmed it, slightly too still, shoulders drawn in, the posture of a man who has just heard something that he can't physically move away from. Across from him stood Warren Hollister and a woman Emily didn't recognize, 50s, dark blazer, the clipped manner of someone in hospital administration who handles specifically the kind of problems that don't appear in the mission statement. Behind them was a man in a suit who was not hospital personnel. The suit was the wrong cut, the shoes were wrong, and he was holding a folder in a way that said the folder was not for reference, but for delivery. The nursing staff at the station had gone very quiet. 3 nurses, a tech, the unit secretary, all of them suddenly intent on their screens, doing the thing humans do when they want to be present for something without being seen to be present for it. Briggs's gaze moved across the station and found Emily. The look on his face was something she hadn't seen from him before. Not anger, not contempt, which were his two default settings in her direction. It was something smaller and more naked than that. It was a man recognizing, in real time, that the architecture he'd built was not what he'd thought it was. She held his gaze for one moment, then she looked away. She wasn't going to give him the dramatic version of this. She'd earned the right to look away. Hollister said something to Briggs, too low to hear across the station. Briggs said something back. The woman in the dark blazer opened her own folder, separate from the suits folder, her own, and said something that made Briggs's posture change again, further, in the direction of a man who has run out of ground. Diane materialized at Emily's shoulder. "Do you know what's happening?" "I have an idea." Was this because of last night? Because of Holloway? Because of everything, Emily said. All of it together. Diane was quiet for a moment. "He's going to lose his department, isn't he?" Emily picked up her bag. "I should go home." "Emily." She stopped. Diane looked at her. The 12-year veteran, the woman who had given her the careful look in the stairwell, and said, "I'm telling you because I think it's information you need," and had been right. She looked at Emily now with the expression of someone assembling something they should have assembled a long time ago. "How long have you known?" Diane asked. "Known what?" "That he was the one who filed the nursing board complaint." Emily was quiet. She hadn't said that, not out loud, not to anyone in this building. She'd said it to Dade, in the consultation room, in the form of a question about IP addresses. She hadn't said it as a certainty because she hadn't had one. "I didn't know," Emily said. "I suspected the timing." "Because it was November." "Because it was November," she agreed. November, when the documentation campaign against her had begun, when the small accumulated complaints had started appearing in her file. And 6 weeks ago, when someone with institutional access had filed an anonymous complaint to the nursing board, was also the week after Emily had been the nurse on duty, when a Harlan-Vex-affiliated physician had come through the ER for a consult. She documented the visit the way she documented everything. She hadn't known why it mattered. She'd just known that it felt like the kind of thing that should have a record. That record had apparently mattered very much to someone who needed her discredited before she could figure out what she'd seen. Whether Briggs had understood who he was helping, or whether he'd simply seen an opportunity to remove a nurse who made him uncomfortable and had been handed a mechanism to do it. That was a question for investigators and lawyers, not for her. "Go home," Diane said. "Get some sleep." Emily nodded. She walked to the exit. She pushed through the ER doors into the Oregon morning. The fog was gone. Genuinely gone, not just thinned, which happened maybe a third of the time before noon. The sky was the flat gray of clouds that haven't decided anything yet, and the air smelled like wet pavement and the distant salt of the coast. She stood outside for a moment, not because she needed to, just because she could. She slept for 6 hours. Real sleep, the kind without dreams or any of the half-conscious monitoring that passed for rest when she'd been in other situations and other beds in other countries. She woke at 4 in the afternoon to 4 missed calls, one from Vasquez's number, one from Diane, one from a number she didn't recognize, and one from the Ashford Regional HR coordinator. She returned Vasquez's call first. The IP address, Vasquez said without preamble, traced to a device registered to the Silver Creek Medical Center Administrative Network, specifically to the subnet associated with physician office accounts. A pause. "We've shared the information with the state medical board and the hospital's legal team. Is it enough? Combined with the timing, the documented complaint campaign, and a separate piece we found this morning, yes." Vasquez's voice was careful but specific. "A communication between the filing entity and a Harlan-Vex subsidiary. Brief, but it exists." Emily sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the wall. "He didn't know what he was helping cover up," she said. It wasn't a defense. She said it the way you say something you need to say out loud to know if it's true. "Probably not entirely," Vasquez agreed, "but he knew he was filing a false complaint, and he knew why he wanted you gone." Another pause. "That's enough." "Okay. Your statement has been submitted to the federal prosecutor's office. You should expect contact from their team within 48 hours. Standard process from here." Vasquez was quiet for a moment. How's the shoulder? Sore? Get it checked. I will. Reyes Carter. The use of her full name, her real name, had a different weight when Vasquez said it than when Nolan had said it the night before. More like a door held open than a trap sprung. You did well. Emily thought about all the things she could say to that. She thought about Firebase Keller and the defibrillator that failed, and the 11 minutes in the dark. She thought about November and the file being built against her while she went to work and documented everything and caught things people missed and waited to see what came next. I did my job, she said. She could hear Vasquez almost smile. Yes, you did. Bombed. The HR call was from Brenda Sato. She'd called at 2:30 in the afternoon, which meant the conversation with Briggs had concluded, and whatever had been decided was now being processed through official channels. Emily called back and reached Brenda on the second ring, and Brenda's voice had the quality of someone who has spent the afternoon in meetings and is operating on the other side of something significant. Ms. Carter, thank you for calling back. Dr. Hollister has asked me to set up a meeting at your earliest convenience. A pause. He wanted me to convey that your position in the ER is not in question and that he looks forward to... Another pause. Shorter, like she was reading something. A more complete conversation. What happened with Dr. Briggs? Emily asked. Brenda was quiet for a beat longer than a neutral answer would require. Dr. Briggs has been placed on administrative suspension pending a formal review of clinical and administrative conduct. That review will be conducted by an independent panel. Her voice was professional, but Emily could hear something underneath it. Not satisfaction exactly, but the particular tone of someone who watched something happen that they'd seen coming and are relieved it finally arrived. He is not currently scheduled to return to clinical duties. Emily looked at the ceiling. Thank you, Brenda. Of course. When would you like to schedule with Dr. Hollister? I'll need a day or two. I have some things to handle first. She went to the hospital's urgent care the next morning and had her shoulder evaluated. A physician named Dr. Lena Park, who had not worked with her before and therefore had no particular feelings about her either way, told her it was a significant muscle contusion without structural damage, gave her an anti-inflammatory prescription, and told her to avoid overhead lifting for 2 weeks. Emily said she'd try. Doctor. Park looked at her shoulder and then at her face and said, with the directness of someone who's seen a lot of injuries, occupational. Something like that, Emily said. She filled the prescription. She bought groceries. She walked 2 miles along the coastal path near her apartment, the one she used when she needed to think, and thought about what Vasquez had said about Harlan Vex and about Grider, and about Drum in custody in Portland, and about the documentation Tate had been carrying, which was now in federal hands and would presumably do what it needed to do in courtrooms she would never see. She thought about the nursing board complaint and what it had been intended to accomplish. Strip her credential. Destroy her ability to work. Make her so occupied with defending herself that she wouldn't have the clarity to be a useful witness. Make her small. The coast wind came in off the Pacific, cold and direct, smelling like open water. She thought about what came next. The meeting with Hollister was on a Thursday, 48 hours after the night everything broke open. His office in the daylight felt different than it had at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, less like a tribunal and more like a room where someone was trying to figure out what to do with an assessment they'd gotten badly wrong. He was alone this time. No Briggs, no Sato, no folder of documentation. Just Hollister behind his desk and Emily in the chair across from it, and the particular atmosphere of a conversation that both people know is going to be awkward, and neither of them is pretending otherwise. I've reviewed your personnel file, he said. The real one. Okay. You have more combat medical experience than any physician currently employed by this facility. He said it without fanfare, just stated it, the way you state something that required courage to say. That's not an exaggeration. I'm aware of my record. I want to be honest with you. He folded his hands on the desk. The complaint Dr. Briggs filed against you in November, the documentation campaign. I signed off on parts of it because his characterization of the incidents was consistent with a pattern I've seen in nurses who are struggling with physician oversight. I didn't question it aggressively enough. Emily waited. I should have. He looked at her. I'm telling you that because I think you deserve a direct acknowledgement and not a memo. She studied his face for a moment. He wasn't performing contrition. He was doing the harder thing, which was being honest without any particular expectation of what she'd do with it. I appreciate that, she said, and she meant it, which she hadn't been sure she would. I'd like to talk about your role going forward. He opened a different folder, not the tribunal folder, a new one. The ER director position has been vacant for 7 months. We've been running on an interim structure with Briggs at the top, which clearly... He stopped, started again. We need leadership that understands emergency medicine from a clinical ground level, not administrative theory, actual practice. Emily looked at the folder. You're offering me a director role. I'm asking if you'd be willing to discuss it. I'm a nurse. The ER director position at Silver Creek doesn't require a physician. It requires someone who can run a department, manage a team, implement protocol, and make sound clinical decisions under pressure. He looked at her. Based on the past 11 months, and everything I've learned in the past 48 hours, I'm not aware of anyone better qualified. Emily sat back. She thought about the morning she'd arrived at Silver Creek in October, in plain scrubs and clean sneakers, saying hello to Diane and going to work. She'd wanted something ordinary, something that existed inside 4 walls and had a beginning and an end, and didn't require her to be the version of herself that lived in classified files. She thought about Margaret Holloway's hands. She thought about Victor Pratt's blood pressure coming down 6 points. She thought about Priya in the ICU, startled but correct when it mattered, going for the blood pressure cuff without being asked twice. I have conditions, Emily said. Hollister's eyebrows rose. I expected you might. The faulty stairwell doors on the north wing, they've been in the write-up system since February, fixed within 2 weeks of my start date, or I'm filing a separate compliance report. Done. The overnight security structure is inadequate. Last night demonstrated that in a way that's now extremely well documented. I want a review of access protocols and staffing minimums. I'll commission it. And the nursing board complaint needs to be formally withdrawn and expunged. Whatever Vasquez's team does on the legal end, I need the board notification to come from this institution. I've already asked our legal team to initiate that. He paused. What else? She thought about what else. She thought about the right answer, which was the one that wasn't about her, the one that was about the next patient who came through the door, and the one after that, and the protocols that would govern what happened to them and who made the decisions and whether anyone was paying close enough attention. I want the incident from the Holloway case reviewed by the independent panel along with Briggs's other conduct, she said, not to add to his file. To have it on record that the diagnostic flag was accurate and the delay was consequential. For the next time it happens with a different patient and a different physician, I want there to be a precedent that says someone looked at this and called it what it was. Hollister looked at her for a moment. That's a very specific request, he said. It's the one that matters most. He was quiet. Then he wrote something on the pad beside his keyboard, a single line, unhurried. Agreed. Emily looked at the window behind his desk. The fog was back today, soft and gray and complete. On the sill, someone had left a small plant in a terracotta pot, succulent, half dead, being kept alive by an irregular watering schedule and sheer stubbornness. She recognized the feeling. She picked up the folder he'd left open on the desk and looked at the first page. The position description. The department scope. The protocols that currently governed how Silver Creek's ER operated in all their inadequacy, waiting to be revised. I'll need 2 days to think about it, she said. Of course. She stood. Hollister stood, reflexively, automatically, the kind of courtesy that comes not from performance but from recalibration. She walked toward the door. Miss Carter? She turned. He was still standing behind his desk, and his expression had the careful quality of something he'd been deciding whether to say. The documentation you kept, the incident logs, every flag you filed. He paused. You knew, didn't you, from early on, that you might need all of it. Emily put her hand on the door. I always document everything, she said. It's a habit. She walked out into the corridor. At the nurse's station, Diane was running the board for the afternoon shift, and she looked up when Emily came out of the elevator and gave her the look. Not the careful reading look from before, but a different one. Plainer. Something that in another context might have been relief. Emily stopped at the station. Anything interesting on the board? New admit in Bay 3. 48-year-old male, construction injury, left forearm. Diane paused, the ghost of something at the corner of her mouth. Dr. Walsh is handling it. She's been good this week. She's been good for a while, Emily said. She just needed space. Diane looked at her for a moment. Then, quietly, "Are you coming back?" Emily picked up the Bay 3 chart from the rack. Force of habit. "I'll let you know in 2 days," she said. She set the chart back down. She pulled on her jacket. In the ambulance bay, an incoming unit was pulling up. Routine, not critical. The radio said something about a 52-year-old with possible appendicitis. The bay doors opened with their mechanical sound and the cold air came in and someone called for a gurney and the department moved, smooth and instinctive, the way it did when it was working right. Emily watched it for a moment. Then her phone buzzed. Vasquez. She answered. Vasquez's voice was different from the morning call. The careful tone gone, replaced by something tighter. "There's a problem," Vasquez said. Emily went still. "What kind?" Drum's legal team filed a motion 3 hours ago. They're claiming the recovered documentation from Tate's effects is inadmissible. Chain of custody violation based on the manner of recovery. A pause. They're specifically citing the fact that an uncertified civilian accessed the scene before federal agents secured it. Emily understood immediately. The ICU. The curtain. Her hands on the effects bag. "They're citing me," she said. "The motion names you as the civilian who broke the seal on the effects bag before the warrant was executed." Vasquez's voice was steady, but Emily could hear the weight under it. If the motion succeeds, the documentation gets thrown out. And without it, the primary case against Drum loses its evidentiary foundation. Emily stood in the corridor of Silver Creek Medical Center, jacket half on, and thought about a man on the floor of an ICU room reaching into a bag that didn't belong to him, and herself pulling him away, and the bag landing on the floor, and herself picking it up by the corner. And she thought about something else, something she'd noticed in the moment and filed away automatically, the way she filed away everything. "The seal was already broken," she said. Silence on the line. "When I picked up the bag, the seal was already broken. He'd opened it before I got through the curtain." She thought back, precise, specific, the way she always was about what she'd seen. The bag was on the table, open, with the flap displaced to the left. He had his hand inside it. I pulled him away from it. When the bag fell, it fell closed. She paused. "I told Dade I hadn't opened it. I was accurate. The documentation of the scene, Dade photographed it immediately after. The photos will show the displacement pattern of the seal material." "You're certain about this?" "I'm certain about what I saw." The line was quiet for 3 seconds. "I'm going to need a supplemental statement," Vasquez said. "Tonight, can you do that?" "Yes." "This will likely require you to testify if the motion proceeds to a hearing." "I understand." Another pause. Longer. Reyes Carter. "If Drum's team pushes this, they are going to come after your credibility specifically, your employment situation, the nursing board complaint, everything that Briggs documented against you." She said it plainly, not as a warning designed to frighten, but as information that a person deserved to have before deciding. "They will try to make you look like someone who can't be trusted." Emily looked at the ambulance bay where the incoming patient was being transferred to a gurney with the careful efficiency of people who'd done it 1,000 times. She looked at the board, visible through the station window, with its flags and its patient names and its color-coded urgencies. She thought about every piece of paper she had filed in 11 months. She thought about every note, every incident log, every timestamp, every documented conversation. She thought about Briggs saying, "I'll pretend I didn't hear that tone," and her saying, "I'd like it documented that I raised the concern," and Diane's look afterward, and the 6 witnesses who'd been in earshot, and the patient board that showed the time of the first flag and the time of the alarm, and the 47 minutes between them. "Let them try," Emily said. The supplemental statement took 90 minutes. She gave it in Dade's temporary field office, which was a conference room on the hospital's fourth floor that had been commandeered for the week and now smelled like takeout coffee and printer toner and the particular focused exhaustion of people working a case under a deadline. She sat across from a federal attorney named Joanna Marsh, 30s, precise, with the kind of attention that didn't miss much, and she described what she'd seen in the ICU exactly as she'd seen it, in the sequence she'd seen it, without interpretation or editorializing. Marsh asked 3 follow-up questions. All 3 were good ones. The bag was on the table, Emily said. Flap open, displaced left. His right hand was inside. The seal material, it's the adhesive type, tears on a specific angle when you pull it, was hanging free on the right side of the opening. And when did you observe the photographs Dade took of the scene? I didn't. I told him what I saw. He photographed the scene independently. Emily looked at her steadily. Check the timestamps on the photos against my statement. I gave this description before I ever saw his documentation. Marsh wrote something. That's helpful. I know. Marsh looked up with an expression that was almost amusement and chose not to be. Is there anything else you observed about the condition of the bag that you didn't include in your initial statement? Emily thought about it honestly. She did this with every assessment, held the question open for a moment longer than the quick answer required, in case the quick answer wasn't the complete one. The zip pocket on the front was already unzipped, she said. I didn't include it because I assumed it wasn't relevant. Patient effects bags often come in with pockets open, but if the device was in the zip pocket and not the main compartment, then the displacement pattern is in 2 locations, not 1. Marsh stopped writing and looked at her. Dade's photos will show it, Emily said. They did. Marsh confirmed it 40 minutes later by phone, and the expression on her face when she hung up was the expression of a lawyer who has just watched a motion for inadmissibility develop a serious structural problem. We'll respond to the motion by Friday, Marsh said. I don't anticipate it succeeding. Emily picked up her jacket. Is that all? For now, Marsh paused. Miss Reyes Carter, for what it's worth, the detail about the zip pocket. Most people don't retain that under those circumstances. I retain everything, Emily said. It's not a virtue. It's just how I'm built. She went home and slept 8 hours this time. The motion hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday. Emily didn't attend. Witnesses to the event weren't required, and Marsh had everything she needed. She found out how it went from Vasquez by phone on Wednesday afternoon. Denied, Vasquez said. Unanimously. The judge reviewed the photographic evidence and the timestamped statement and described the defense's argument as a brief pause, and Emily could hear the careful neutrality Vasquez was applying to the next words. Not supported by the available evidence. Emily was in her kitchen making tea. And Drum? Trial is set for October. Greeter is testifying for the prosecution. 4 additional witnesses have come forward in the past week since the motion failed. People who were waiting to see which way the wind went. Vasquez paused. The prosecutor's office is confident. The soldiers, Emily said. A longer pause. There are 11 documented cases currently under review where equipment failure may have been a contributing factor. The investigation team is working through them. Vasquez's voice didn't change pitch, but it changed quality, became more careful, the way it does when someone is carrying something they haven't put down yet. That part is going to take longer. I know. There will be families who want answers. I know that too. Emily looked out the window over the kitchen sink. Gray sky, light rain starting, the kind that came sideways off the coast. Whatever they need from me. A statement, a deposition, a conversation, whatever they need. I'll pass that on. A beat. Get some rest. You keep telling me that. You keep ignoring me. Emily almost smiled. Goodbye, Colonel. She drank her tea. She looked at the rain for a while. Then she picked up the folder Hollister had given her and read the position description again, carefully, the same way she read a chart, looking not for what it said but for what it meant, and what it didn't say, and what she'd have to build into it herself. She called Hollister at 4 o'clock and said she'd take the role. He said something professionally appropriate. She said something professionally appropriate back. Then she said, I'll need the protocol review materials by Monday and access to the department budget for the past 2 fiscal years. There was a slight pause on his end, the pause of someone recalibrating to a person who has accepted a position and immediately begun working it. I'll have them sent to your inbox this afternoon. Thank you, she said, and ended the call. Quotes. Leonard Briggs's review concluded on a Thursday, 3 weeks after his suspension began, and the results were made available to department heads and relevant staff the following morning. Emily read the summary in Hollister's office, standing, because she hadn't sat down and Hollister hadn't asked her to, and neither of them felt the need to perform the gravity of it with furniture. The panel had found sustained findings on 6 counts: negligent clinical decision-making in 3 documented patient incidents, including the Holloway case; abuse of supervisory authority through a documented pattern of retaliatory conduct toward subordinate staff; falsification of a professional complaint, the nursing board filing, in coordination with an external party, which had been referred to the State Medical Licensing Board as a separate matter. He was stripped of his department chief role, effective immediately and permanently. His clinical privileges were suspended pending the licensing board review. The review, Hollister said, was not expected to go well for him. Emily set the summary down on the desk. He built this department, she said. It wasn't a defense, it was just a fact that deserved to be said out loud by someone. He did, Hollister agreed, and then he used it like a weapon. She thought about the 2 things being simultaneously true, and what that meant about the nature of institutions, how they could be built by someone capable and maintained by someone harmful, and how the 2 things didn't cancel each other out, they just coexisted in the same space until something forced a reckoning. The nursing board complaint, she said, formally withdrawn by this institution last week. The board has expunged the filing. He paused. Your credential record is clean. It was always clean. There was nothing substantive to investigate. But now the filing itself is gone. She nodded once. That was the part that had cost the most. Not the threat to her job, not the public humiliation of the department meetings, not even the 4:30 meeting with Hollister and Briggs and the formal weight of the write-up folder. It was the nursing board complaint, the attempt to reach into the one thing she'd built in 3 years of civilian life and make it something she had to defend rather than something she'd earned. That had cost her something she didn't have a clean word for. Now it was gone. She let herself acknowledge that for a moment. Then she picked up her folder and went to work. The ER protocols review took 11 days. Not because it was complicated. Emily had been running the problems in her head for 11 months and had most of the analysis completed before she ever sat down with the budget reports. But because she was methodical about it, and she brought people in to check her work, which was slower and also better. She pulled Diane in first. Tell me what breaks, Emily said. They were in the consultation room, which had been cleared of its federal agent energy and returned to its usual purpose. Emily had a legal pad. Diane had coffee and 12 years of institutional memory. Overnight access control, Diane said immediately. You know this. The freight elevator, the north stairwells, the ambulance bay sensor loop. Those are already in the capital request. What else? Handoff protocol between shifts. We lose information. The charting is fine, but the verbal handoff is inconsistent. Depends on who's handing off to whom and whether they have history. Diane paused. And the physician escalation pathway, when a nurse flags a concern and the attending dismisses it. Right now there's no formal second look mechanism. It just dies. Emily wrote that down. That one's going in as a mandatory protocol. Diane looked at her for a moment. You're going to make this place harder to work in. For some people, Emily agreed. Good. Diane said it without ambiguity. What about staffing? They worked for 2 hours. It wasn't a conversation that felt like progress in real time. It felt like inventory, like going through a room and naming what was there, which is unglamorous and necessary and completely invisible once the room is fixed. But Emily had done enough unglamorous, necessary, and visible work in her life to know it was the kind that mattered most. She brought Dr. Walsh in separately. Walsh, who had been good under pressure all along and simply hadn't had the space to be seen clearly, came in with her own notes. 3 pages, handwritten, organized by category, and put them on the table without preamble. I've been waiting for someone to ask, Walsh said. I'm asking now. Walsh was 29, same age as Emily, and had 2 years out of residency and the particular frustration of someone who sees things clearly and has been told repeatedly that clarity is not her job. She talked for 40 minutes. Emily listened and wrote and asked 4 questions, all of them worth asking. When they were done, Walsh looked at her notes and then at Emily. Can I say something that's not about protocols? Go ahead. The Holloway case. I was in the building. I heard Briggs dismiss your flag. I documented my own observations in my personal notes because I didn't know what else to do with them. She paused. I should have said something more formally. At the time. I didn't. Emily held her gaze. Why didn't you? Walsh was quiet for a moment. Because I was afraid it wouldn't matter. And now? Now I know it would have. She looked at the table. I'm sorry. Emily considered the apology, its shape, its weight, what it was actually asking. The next time you observe something that matters, she said, document it and tell someone. That's all. She picked up her pen. You can't fix what you did then. You can change what you do next time. Walsh nodded. She gathered her notes. At the door, she stopped. Are you going to be hard to work for? Emily looked at the legal pad full of protocol notes and staffing assessments and access control revisions. I'm going to be honest, she said, which overlaps with hard sometimes. Walsh left. Emily thought that was probably the best outcome she could have gotten from that conversation. The day she formally assumed the director role, she came in through the ambulance bay the same way she'd come in every shift for 11 months, badge on, jacket off, eyes on the board before she'd cleared the door. The only difference was the title on the badge had changed, and the office adjacent to the nursing station had her name on the door, which she was still slightly unused to seeing. Diane was at the station. Rita was on the morning shift and gave Emily the particular nod of someone who had been right about something and was too experienced to make anything of it. The medical student, Derek, was presenting on a patient to Walsh in Bay 2, and Emily could hear him from the doorway, giving it time, using the silence correctly, arriving at the right answer. She stopped by the station and looked at the board. 12 patients, 3 holding from overnight, 9 new admits, including 1 critical being managed in Bay 1 that Walsh had already flagged and was watching. The board was color-coded and current and accurate to the minute. Anything I need to know? She asked Diane. Bay 1 is under control. Bay 4 patient is waiting on cardiology consult at 10. Diane paused very deliberately. I flagged an O2 trending issue in the chart at 7:50. The attending has been notified. Emily looked at her. Diane held the look for exactly 1 beat, long enough to say what it meant, short enough to keep it between them. Good, Emily said. She went into her office and opened her laptop and started reading the first of 47 protocol submissions she'd asked department staff to file before the end of the month. They weren't all good, some were repetitive, some were impractical. 2 had internal contradictions that would have created more problems than they solved, but they were real, which meant people were thinking about the work and not just doing it on autopilot, and that was exactly what she'd asked for. At 11:40, her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize, not federal, not hospital administration, not Vasquez. She answered. Is this Emily Carter? A woman's voice, older. It is. My name is Joanna Holloway. You took care of my mother in March. Emily set down her pen. I remember her. She's home, Joanna said. She's been home for 3 weeks. The cardiologist says she's doing really well. Better than they expected. A pause. She wanted me to call because she's been trying to figure out what to say to you, and she keeps saying she can't find the right words, so she asked me to call and just tell you that she knows. Another pause, shorter. She says she knows someone was paying attention when it mattered. Emily looked out the window of her office at the ER, where the morning was running the way a well-managed ER ran. Not quietly, not perfectly, but with the specific functional noise of people working together towards something. Tell her I'm glad she's home, Emily said. She also wanted to know your name, your full name. She wants to write it down. Emily Reyes Carter. She heard the scratch of a pen on the other end. Thank you, Joanna said. She says thank you. After she hung up, Emily sat for a moment. Not a long moment. just long enough to let the call settle in the way things settle when they land in exactly the right place. She'd spent 3 years trying to become something quieter than what she was. She'd wanted the edges softened, the part of herself that moved through rooms calculating threats and cataloging exits, the part that had filed 2 flags in 2021 knowing they'd be buried and filed them anyway because the record mattered even when no one was looking, the part that had kept notes and timestamps and documentation through 11 months of someone trying to make her small. She'd wanted to put all of that down and just be a nurse. What she'd learned, not as a revelation, but as something earned slowly and confirmed at 5 in the morning in a hospital corridor with her shoulder bleeding through her scrubs, was that none of those things were separate. The woman who pulled people out of burning vehicles and the woman who caught a trending O2 saturation before a patient stopped breathing were the same person. The soldier who filed 2 flags knowing they'd be suppressed, and the nurse who said, "I'd like it documented that I raised the concern in front of 6 witnesses," were the same person. She hadn't softened. She'd focused. That was the difference. She opened the next protocol submission and read it. It was from a tech named Marcus, who'd been at Silver Creek for 3 years and had apparently been sitting on very specific ideas about supply chain management in the overnight hours, which were good ideas. And she wrote a note at the top that said, "Schedule meeting this week," and meant it. The ER ran. People got better. Some of them didn't, which was the part nobody talked about in the clear language it deserved. The part where you did everything right and it still wasn't enough, and you carried that, and you came back the next day. She'd been carrying that her whole working life. She'd keep carrying it. That was the weight of the job, and she'd chosen it knowing what it weighed. At 2 in the afternoon, she walked the floor. Not an inspection. She'd made that distinction clearly in her first staff meeting. She walked the floor to see what was happening, not to evaluate whether it was happening correctly. And the difference was that one made people better and the other made them careful. And careful was not the same as good. In Bay 6, a 70-year-old man named Arthur was telling a joke to the nurse taking his blood pressure. The nurse, Priya, down from the ICU for a cross-training shift, was trying to maintain the focused expression of someone taking a blood pressure reading, which was failing because the joke was apparently funny. Emily walked past without slowing down. She filed it in the same place she filed everything, the working picture of a department that was functioning, that was not perfect, that was made of people who were tired and human and showing up anyway. In Bay 9, Walsh was explaining something to Derek with the specific patience of someone teaching rather than just directing, which was new. 2 weeks ago, Walsh had been efficient with the students and not much more. Emily watched for 30 seconds from the doorway and then moved on. She checked the board one more time before her afternoon meeting. All flags current, Bay 1 stable. The cardiology consult in Bay 4 had happened at 10:15, and the patient was being admitted to the cardiac floor with a confirmed diagnosis and a treatment plan. The flag that had been documented at 7:50 had mattered. She'd made sure it would. She left at 6. Not because the work was done. It was never done, which was something you either made peace with or didn't, and she had. But because the people she'd put in place were capable of running the next 8 hours without her. And one of the things she'd learned in the hard way that hard-earned things get learned was that building something worth trusting meant actually trusting it. She drove home with the windows down because the rain had stopped and the air off the coast was cold and specific and smelled like the honest edge of the world. She'd been mocked, documented, suspended, filed against, shot at, and subpoenaed. She'd also caught an MI before it killed someone, neutralized 3 armed men in a hospital at 2 in the morning, given testimony that held a federal case together, and built a protocol framework that would change how this department handled the next patient who came through those doors scared and sick and trusting someone to pay attention. Nobody would see most of it. That was fine. The work didn't need an audience. It needed to be done. She parked outside her building, sat for a moment with the engine off. The lights of Ashford were diffuse in the leftover fog, soft and unglamorous, an ordinary small city doing its ordinary thing. She wasn't the nurse they'd mocked. She wasn't the sergeant from the classified file. She wasn't the witness, the threat, the inconvenient person someone had spent